Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast. My name is Nathan.
I'm Anna.
And we are excited to talk with you today about how we can better love God and use tech. Gospel Tech is a ministry Anna and I started a couple years ago now, founded out of Flint and Iron, a nonprofit we started to spark positive purpose in youth. And so Gospel Tech, our hope is we're going to be able to equip parents to really fight for their families, not just with them when it comes to tech. So that's what today's conversation is actually going to be about. How do we reestablish tech boundaries? And as episode 6 of this series, we're actually talking about how do we reestablish tech boundaries with others. The impending holiday season is upon us, Christmas, Thanksgiving, all those family members around, and you are bound to run into people who do not have the same standards for tech that you do, for better or worse. And so we're going to be talking through what does that look like to have those conversations. So with that idea kind of planted, let's get this conversation started. Welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast, a resource for parents who are feeling outpaced and overwhelmed as they raise children in a tech world. As an educator, parent, and tech user, I want to equip parents with the tools, resources, and confidence they need to raise kids who love God and use tech. As we get started today, I'm very excited to talk about this. We are very excited to talk about this with you.
I'm excited too.
And so what we're going to do a little housekeeping. The first is thank you to everyone. I saw some new ratings come up on the podcast today. Thank you guys so much. That does help people find us as a resource when they go and they search in podcasts for gospel or technology or how do I help my kids in a Google search. That actually, or when they Google it, I don't think people still say Google search, but
I'm going to get on the World Wide Web and open the Googles.
So when you use the Googles and you try to find us, that helps. Thank you for listening and for sharing this with your friends. That is amazing and a huge encouragement to us. So thank you for doing that. I did want to just mention we have officially released the Gospel Tech online workshop, and that really works in two ways. The first way is we are keynoting and capstoning for local churches. So if you're interested, your church wants to talk about how do we establish or reestablish tech boundaries, what does it look like to love God and use tech? I come in and I basically do a 1-hour workshop with a Q&A, a question and answer session afterwards. And then that leads into kind of these small group gospel tech online workshop where they walk through the workbook. We are getting a bound version of the workbook. Right now this is a PDF, but there will be an actual paper version, and you can walk through that with your families. There's 7 little 10-minute lessons, basically how do we make a family tech framework and how do we walk this out in daily life. So you can do that. That's the first way. And the second way is just run it with just your family. You can go to the website in the notes below, and it will actually run you right there. So we run through Thinkific. So
cool.
Those are kind of our updates. Thank you all for being a part of this conversation and for being with us on this crazy journey.
Okay, before we jump into our topic, we'll do a little icebreaker.
Ooh, ice breaking. All right. No?
What have you been reading? Tell us what you've been reading really quickly.
I have been reading.
You have 20 seconds.
Wow. Books from you, Mary Shelley, Frankenstein. Last one was Persepolis.
Good job.
Thanks.
Are you enjoying those?
I would say I enjoy answering that the most. That was like the worst answer ever. All right, everybody. Those books are awesome. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is ridiculous and actually really good.
Nathan finally read it.
I finally read it, and I finally reread Fahrenheit 451, thanks to you. Also, not terrible, unlike my high school brain told me. Turns out my adult brain really liked it.
Good.
So really good. And then Persepolis is so sad, but it's like a comic book.
It's a graphic novel.
It's a graphic novel. Is the word. That's the adult word for comic book.
It's a comic book.
It's a comic book
about Iran.
about Iran and the Cultural Revolution, which oddly pertinent to what we're experiencing today globally and locally. So maybe go pick up a copy of Persepolis. Not for your kids, for you. How about you?
I am reading. We've been book recommending to each other. That's why Nathan just read those 3. So he had read A Tale of Two Cities. And I never have read it. So I'm working my way through that. I need to read it somewhere besides
in bed
at 10 o'clock at night because I'm not getting very far. But I like it.
And I would say this is one of those books where like everyone's told me for my entire life, like, you should read this. And so I haven't. I just was like, no, that's dumb. That's for book people, like English majors.
I don't know how I got through an English major and didn't read that book.
It's actually really good. And also super, super pertinent, talking about cultural revolutions and the ideas of good and bad. And so
yeah, I like it. Dickens
really
is funny.
Super funny.
So
yeah, if you're French, you might be terribly offended by that. But
our big French audience
our
out
big
there,
French
so
audience,
offended.
you might be, but it's solid writing. Okay, fun.
Yep.
Well, then, as we kind of transition to this, we're talking today. A question we get a lot is about how do you manage tech boundaries with those we do life with. So we're talking about our friends, our family, our neighbors. How do we maintain our own tech policies when our kids go to other environments, other people's houses? They're hanging out with other kids in the neighborhood. What does that look like? So the first thing we have to do is establish our own policy. So we're assuming here that you have some standard for technology. If you do not yet, please check out the previous episodes. This whole season 3 is all about reestablishing tech boundaries. And we understand that for some of us, that means establishing tech boundaries, either because our kids are just now kind of crossing from 3, 4 into 5, 6. And that's where they start seeing other kids with certain tech and they're going to start talking. So have the conversations. Previous episodes of season 3 will help you with that. But assuming you do have them, then the question is, all right, what do we do now? How do we manage this in talking with others? So that's going to be the first thing is how do we do it with our own family? The second is how do we clearly and kindly communicate that to others?
Okay, we do suggest knowing your expectations ahead of time so that when an invitation to game or play or, hey, have your kid join this Facebook Messenger app or have your kid Marco Polo My Kid, which those things can be appropriate in certain situations, but they also can be really overwhelming if we haven't come up with a boundary for that. Like, okay, we are going to allow polos, but we're only going to allow once a day or whatever that is. So it's not just a constant, like, hey, mom, hand me your phone all day long. Yeah. So I think just having that for your own family, it just eliminates a lot of unnecessary conflict just within your own people so that everybody knows, nope, this is just what's happening here.
So then how and why do we do that communicating then? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to communicate, or I guess let's do it from a negative perspective. If we don't communicate, what comes up with that?
Well, it allows a lot of hurt and frustration to take place. And this is just coming from my own experiences in my own life in general, when I don't communicate what I'm thinking is going to happen, typically the other person doesn't know what I'm thinking, which is really surprising. How could you not know? But if I'm not saying, well, this is kind of what we're thinking or what I'm thinking, I like to, it can lead to frustration just because I'm going to assume things are going to be one way when you might not think that. And now you're doing something different, but we never talked about it. So you have no reason to be doing things the way I thought they were going to be done. Yeah.
And we have a really big chance of kind of, I guess, imposing our thoughts. Like that person is using a phone at the dinner table. That's unacceptable. Or that person lets their kids play that game or listen to that music. And we start to take the action and then superimpose it with, that means they don't respect me or they're bad parents or they aren't doing what they should be doing, right? And so we need to really bring all of that to the surface, especially in this coming season of mixed families and intermingling rules.
Yeah, I think that happens all year, but especially when we're entering into the holiday season. And we had this happen. I feel like this was a few years ago when our kids were even younger. We had this happen where my brother was visiting from out of town. He doesn't live in the state, so he's visiting from out of town, and he had his phone out all through dinner. And we had never talked with him about, like, this is when we think it's appropriate to have your phone out. And for our family, we don't have our phone out during dinner. We like to put the phones away and just be present at dinner, especially with our kids at the table, like to model, this is how you eat dinner like a human, not a crazy monster. So he was on his...
Most of what our dinner time
that is
involves.
Dinner time at our house. So anyway, my brother's on his phone the whole time, and I'm just getting mad in my head, like, how rude, how could he be on his phone? He must not like us. He doesn't want to be a part of the conversation. When really I had never said to him, hey, we don't have our phones out at dinner. Like, could you please put your phone away? And as soon as those words left my mouth, he was happy to put his phone away and participate in the way that we had wanted for our kids to see. It wasn't a fight. There was no argument about it. It was just great. I hadn't thought of that. That's a great idea. We can make that happen. So when I just hold on to my own expectations and I never say them out loud, nobody else can be at fault for that except for me because I didn't communicate. It doesn't mean I necessarily have to impose my boundaries all over everybody all the time. But if somebody's in my house having dinner with my kids, then I think that's a reasonable spot to say, here's how we do things.
Yeah, and I think you're really clear on that idea that like if we don't have boundaries, then there's frustration from unspoken expectations, because we all have expectations, sometimes even of our kids that we haven't spoken. So the first thing we have to do is get together with our core family and establish those expectations. We call that a family tech framework. And the idea is there's just a core set of rules that apply to all family members, and everyone is going to love everyone enough to help them hold to those standards. Not because the rules are going to make you good, but because the rules are going to maintain the relationships, and they're going to maintain a common base from which you can now fight for your family, not just with them. So you can say, hey, I've seen that you're distracted at dinner. Please put your phone away, right? That's not something our family does. Not, you're annoying me right now with your phone, right? Like it makes it less personal, attacks more big. So then you mentioned boundaries though. And this is the second thing. Like, so now we have family boundaries. How do we communicate boundaries with others?
Yeah. And we just want to kind of back up. If this is a newer concept to you, we're pulling a lot of our boundary research and insights from the book Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. And if you haven't read that, it's just a general great book for all of life, but
work, friends.
Yeah, everything. But we're just applying it specifically to this topic today. But they define boundaries. This is what they say about boundaries, that boundaries define us. They define what is me and what is not me. A boundary shows where I end and where someone else begins. Knowing what I am to own and take responsibility for gives me freedom. So I kind of like that. It's like setting up, they describe it as like you have a fence around a property line, right? Like if you live in a neighborhood, like we have a fence. This part that's in the fence is what I'm in charge of, and I need to take responsibility for. And what's on the outside of the fence is my neighbor's responsibility. And I might not always love it, but it's not my job to worry about. Well, I guess you could nuance that more, but just really simplistic. Like that's their stuff. This is my stuff. It is just putting some general parameters up.
Yeah, and the safety part of that being like, so the Bible tells us to guard our hearts, right? That those are our hearts, and we are to guard those hearts, right? And when we take care of our heart and we focus, we set our minds on the things of the Spirit, that now empowers us to live the life we're called to do, which is Proverbs 22:6, raise our kids up in the way they should go. Those are now our purview. Mm-hmm. We have kids. God gifted us to bring them into the world, and they are not problems to fix. They are people to love. And our opportunity is to love them not by making a lot of good rules so that they will be good, but by recognizing they're not good and pointing them to the God who is and who has loved them and has already done everything they need in order to be whole and complete and to live a life of righteousness. So that's our boundary. Mm-hmm. And then everything outside of that, right? I'm not called to tell other people how to run their life, but I'm called to love them, even my enemies, right? And so understanding those is going to be helpful.
Yeah. And I think in regards to our tech use, like we get to be in charge of that decision. We get to prayerfully seek wisdom from the Lord and through wise counsel and resources regarding our tech use and move forward from there with our goals for our family and what we are striving after. This does not mean that we are lording it over other people with our, oh, look how almost Amish we are, and we're so much better than you because our boundaries look like this. Like that's not what this is.
Right.
This is one of those, I think this could go a lot of different ways. It's relatively an open-handed issue.
Yes. Right?
Like this is not a salvation issue. If you are watching this show or your kid plays this video game, like that, it's a matter of conscience, right? Like what has the Lord convicted you of and your family, and you're feeling like this is where we are and what's okay for us to consume and what we're going to allow into our home.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for the most part, I think there are some things that are absolutely morally incorrect.
Yes.
We won't dive in there today, but I think so I've seen this in my own life when I used to be an avid gamer. I still would kind of fall in that category because I still love the culture and the community and the games themselves, but I no longer play video games. It's been 9 years now since I've played a video game, but I was from the age of 7 to the age of whatever 9 years ago was, 28. Going on 20, whatever it was. Couple years ago, 28 or so. I was an avid gamer and I gamed a lot, and then I didn't game anymore. And so now I had this kind of core friend group and interest and 2 decades of experience and practice in something I wasn't doing anymore. And showing up with a group of friends who expect to game and then not being that person to game is awkward. Actually, not because, well, it's awkward. It's like showing up at a Christmas party and then not eating desserts. If you ever tried to do this, right? The people there are like, what do you mean you're not going to have a dessert? Try this one. Hey, John, isn't this the best dessert you've ever had? And they get really kind of awkward.
Are you saying
pushy.
I'm fat?
Are you
You're
saying,
not having dessert? Are
Yeah.
you saying I'm fat and I shouldn't be having dessert?
Right. There's
Because
this
you're not
really,
having any?
everyone's like, well, I'm not starting my diet until January. When you're like, well, I haven't said, all I said is I don't want any dessert.
How dare you?
And it can be like that with technology. If all of a sudden people feel like you're not doing what they're doing, it can get a little awkward. And so don't lord it over people. That's
As some people might say, it's just the Holy Spirit. It's not me.
it's not me.
It's not me. It's just the Holy Spirit
that might just
talking
be
to you.
conviction. I think what you're experiencing right now is so about that. So I found that actually some of my friends weren't actually friends. They were just people who we had a common interest. And when the common interest went away, they no longer had any interest in pursuing me as a human. And then some friends, we just made alternative activities. So as you find this kind of avenue to communicate with others and set these boundaries, just recognize your job is not to say, well, I've done it, therefore this is the best option for you, but say, man, this is what we're doing. We love you guys, and we want to make this a clear and concise conversation so that everyone can be healthy and whole, and our kids can operate as healthy as we believe they need to.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's kind of the why we need to have these.
It is the why.
These boundaries and why we need to communicate them with other people. So we want to talk a little bit about how to do this, because if you're anything like how we were raised, we don't always talk about things that maybe need to get said. And there might be some trepidation when you're thinking about, I'm going to have to say words out loud to another person.
Yeah, about that. Feelings.
So we have our own family guidelines. Everybody in the family knows the guidelines. So let's talk about who and how we communicate these with. So first, probably not everybody in the world or on your Instagram or your Facebook needs to know your screen time policy, right?
Yeah,
I think there's just like, we don't need to blast that everywhere necessarily.
It doesn't. I don't know. Social media is awkward because there is this culture of like, man, I'm doing something new, and I want to let everyone know that we're doing something new because new is cool, and that gets like likes, and it gets people talking, and it gets us attention. And I think there is a time and a place to let people know a specific event, like this event happened, and here's kind of how we're handling it. If those conversations,
feel free to share if you're doing our family framework and you made a tech policy, obviously post about that.
Obviously, those are things worth posting. I guess don't humble brag. I guess just check your heart on that, and don't humble brag.
But just did the Gospel Tech Family Framework changed our lives? That's totally appropriate.
We absolutely love it. We're hearing like testimonies of people who have been encouraged and their lives have changed. So that's a real thing, and we love that. But just don't humble brag. Don't throw things out there because you're trying this new deal. But I think if you see the Lord working in real ways, make it about God's story, make it a testimony about how God's working in your life, and not just the hashtag too blessed to stress kind of stuff where too anointed to be disappointed. We don't need to be kind of rubbing in people's face who might be in the thick of it. But I think there is this time and a place to be a resource.
Yeah.
I guess is what I'm
That's all
trying to
I
say.
wanted to say.
All right.
So the people who probably do need to know about your screen time policies and your family boundaries are people who are in regular contact with your children. People who are part of your parenting team, like babysitters, if grandparents are a regular part of your life, aunts and uncles, neighbors who are a regular part of your kids' comings and goings. Those people probably all need to know this is kind of where we're at. Like
School teacher, we ran into that like in the classroom.
We did, yeah. I feel like we'll get to
we may
school
not have
in a
school.
second, but I also feel like I just want to have a lot of grace for school right now.
Yeah.
So we just need to, again, these are all people, if they're in taking care of your children or they're in close proximity with your children, like feel like it's a good thing to say like, hey, this is kind of the expectations. And I have failed at this in regards to first our babysitters who are 18, right? And so they bring their phones over, and I'm sure our kids are always just angels, but every now and then maybe not angels. And so they bust out Snapchat filters and or games, and we don't find out about it. Because why would they think? They're not thinking, we don't let our kids play games. Like just our kids don't play games yet on our phones. And I don't have Snapchat, so they don't really do that. And that's just kind of a rule for our family. But I never thought, oh, I need to tell this person that. And then one day at dinner, Henry was like, I really like when this babysitter comes over because she lets me play games on her phone. And I was like, oh, I probably should say to our babysitter, yeah, we don't play games on the phone.
Oopsies. Yeah, but it went well. Like,
it's totally fine. She wasn't mad. I made Nathan tell her.
Also perfectly acceptable if your spouse gets to be the one to share that information.
Hey, I'm going to tell the babysitter this, but you tell her this. Then I got to go.
Hey, babysitter, Nathan has something to tell you. Bye.
She didn't care at all. So she just hadn't thought about it. It was very similar to the conversation with my brother of just, this is normal for me. And we need to just say out loud, this is the expectation.
Yeah. And then, so you got babysitters, other people involved in your life, like...
maybe you have grandparents or family members who are in regular contact with your kids. I know some other friends have looser guidelines, maybe with grandma and grandpa, than you might have at home. Like, for example, our kids see my parents on a regular basis and they get to watch Paw Patrol at grandma and grandpa's house. And it's special. We're going to cuddle and we're all going to watch Paw Patrol. And that's just part of their time being there. They're not watching TV all day long, and they don't watch anything that we haven't pre-approved, right? So just having that conversation of just, your kids need to remember the rules, grandma and grandpa need to remember the rules. Let them know, like, this is how much time they can spend on the iPad, or their phone, and this is how much TV they can watch. This is what show is okay for them to be watching.
Yeah, and to be gracious to grandparents, the tech that these kids are getting handed seems very similar to the tech they watch their own children grow up with, and it is not. The iPad, the games, the shows, they are not the exact same. Mr. Rogers is not the same as, I will not name any, I don't want to start any internet wars here, but as 9/10 of the children's programming that is currently available to young kids through your average streaming service. Let's say that. It is not the same thing. It's not programmed the same. The colors aren't the same. The stimulation is not the same. The content is not the same. The purpose is not the same. So grandparents just need to be informed. Be gracious with them, but have that loving conversation of, this is not an acceptable show or amount of time. Or you're doing great. Please keep it to this, like whatever that looks like.
Right. And to follow through on especially kids who are older, like they should know those boundaries and be able to keep them, whether or not grandparents always remember those boundaries. And if it's not being followed through, then that's where a conversation or a consequence for kids needs to come into play. There has to be a little bit of follow through on that side too. Yeah.
And let's scale this up a little bit, because I feel like babysitters in your house is one thing. Family in your house is one thing. Grandparents, we're still like within the inner circle. These are still our COVID group. But now, like, friends and neighbors, we're going to other people's boundaries.
This is hard. I feel like we get this question a lot of, well, my kid's going to run over here to this neighbor's house. And depending on where you live and what your neighborhood is, like how your neighborhood is set up, like this can be really hard if kids are running in and out of houses and that's just really normal for them. What people have on in the house, or what kids are allowed to play, or where screens are allowed in the house. Like, your family might say, like, no, we only have screens in the family room, like where we're all down together. Like, we don't take iPads into the bedroom. Well, maybe next door, that's not the rule. Like, do you know that? Have you had that conversation with that parent? Is that something everybody's talked about? Does your kid know that? Does your kid know what to do if they're next door and the friend is saying, hey, let's go upstairs and we're going to watch whatever on my iPad? Like, does your kid know? Yeah. Have you coached them in that conversation of, okay, this is what you say. This is how you get out of it. Here's what to do if you do see something that you probably shouldn't have seen, or is not an approved game or whatever.
I think the two things we really want to emphasize here is, one, your family standards aren't changing just because they went outside of your house. Like, that is a terrible message to send your kids. And B, not a productive way to help this conversation progress. Like, you have your standard for a reason. There's a reason you don't let that in your house, or you do let them watch this other thing. So that would be the first part. And the second part is, when our kids are going in, accidental porn exposure is a real thing. So if we're allowing our children to go into other people's homes, people that we love, we just need to make sure that we've been very clear with our kids. Like, this is off limits, right?
Even, I feel like, to say too, that the accidental porn exposure could just be like from a text message. It's not even that they're getting on the internet and looking at anything, but if kids have cell phones, like, chances of them, well, first of all, they have the internet there, or even if they have a Kindle, like, all those things have access to the internet. But just even like, oh, I have this picture, right? Like, kids are sending all sorts of scandalous
Yeah, I guess I was thinking of younger than like middle schoolers. I was thinking like low elementary, probably before they've gotten
Okay.
to the nudie pics being sent around. But I think the reality of just older siblings is for real.
Oh, yeah.
Where if we have tech that goes upstairs or tech goes into rooms. And I think I'm not saying everyone out there is malevolent. I'm saying that the internet is a real thing and there are common interests like Roblox or certain video games like Overwatch that have fan bases that even just simple, innocent Googling can run into things that we just need to make sure we've run in front of. There's a lot of shame, there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of anger that can come up from some of these experiences, and we want our kids to know that we're a resource. So that being said, when setting boundaries with friends and neighbors, we need to have established expectations for what's our parameters for when a kid can go to a friend neighbor's house. What are we going to do with talking with their family? We need to front end that so it's not reactionary. We need to actually talk to them. Hey, what's your guys? Start with a question. Don't bring them a contract.
Sign this.
Sign this. But start with a question. What's your guys' tech policy? What do you guys do in relation to this? And then make your decision on, hey, like, can Johnny play outside? Can we go into their house? Are we comfortable with that family environment? Because those standards are your family standards. And I will add one caveat. I do think there's a time and a place, like in our house, there will probably not be any video games just because of my personal situation, and I have no ability to flick it off, and I won't be able to go, well, that's my son playing video games. I'm fine. That won't probably be something I can do, but there are some video games I'm going to be fine with. And actually, Owen already knows the beginning of this conversation. So
he's counting down until he turns 10.
Till he turns 10, and we're starting him on old school video games because 8-bit video games are awesome if you've never played a video game. So we're gonna start with that conversation. So I don't think it's, when I say it's a hard and fast rule, just the rules need to be hard and fast, the expectations. Owen knows that there will be places he can go and play games. We'll be open in that conversation. He'll know why they're not in our house. So just whatever your expectations are, make them clear.
Yeah, for your own kids and for whoever is watching, right? Like for both, that needs to happen on both ends.
Yeah.
Like, so kids aren't surprised, and so neighbors or friends aren't surprised of, oh, hey, we don't. And if they're people who really are on your team and they're really friends, like, then hopefully the conversation will be great. Okay, well, let's make that happen. And when this kid comes over, we're not going to keep that show on, or we're going to put phones over here, whatever the case might be.
Yeah, your family might be the one with all the tech that needs to be sensitive when someone else goes, hey, we don't let our kid watch that show. Like, that's not a personal shot at your family. They're not saying they're better than you. They're saying that's their standard, and and respecting that is important.
Yes. So we kind of talked about these. We have 3 little quick tips, but we kind of talked about them in a mumbo jumbo, but really.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's
really
okay. Hone it down. 3 tips for
3 tips.
communicating
Here we go.
These things. The first is just being really picky about where your kids go, especially when they're little. And if you're in a neighborhood or apartment situation where kids are kind of running in and out, like we have friends who live on base and they're set up in a situation where there's just little boys everywhere and little boys run in and out. They're all best buddies and they run in and out of houses. Well, one family, like they play video games, and that's fine. And her family isn't, my friend's family isn't even opposed to playing video games. Her son's just turned 6, so they're just not ready for that yet. So just having those conversations with her son and then also with the neighbors of, okay, like they live in a warm spot. Outside is always an option. Like, so, hey, buddy, instead of running into this kid's house, because I know you're going to want to play video games, like he can come in our house or you guys can play outside, just so it's not a temptation for you. Right. So just kind of being present and being really choosy about where your kids are going.
Yeah. And so then the second, so the first is be picky where they go. The second is be really clear with expectations. So talk to the mom or the dad or whoever you're engaging with this kid going over and just say, hey, we just want to let you know, like, our kid doesn't play, like for us, it's going to be, our kid doesn't play video games. And then once he's 10, it's going to be, our kid does not play Xbox and PlayStation. And the reasoning behind that, just so you guys know, is that those systems are made for adults. The average gamer is 38. And we are driving the market as adults, and that is a system designed to be exciting to me as a full-grown adult with 20 years of gaming calluses on my psyche. It is not intended for an 11-year-old to just enjoy and start to find fun in gaming. They will enjoy really low-tech gaming because that's all they know, and that's exciting to them. So that's going to be a standard that we have, and we're going to be really clear with that, but not judgmental. Mm-hmm. We're not coming across as, you guys make bad choices, we make the good ones, so follow ours. Just, hey, this is kind of our standard for our family. And I would add the caveat that if they can't follow that, that's concerning beyond just the area of tech. Like if they're not willing to follow your expectations for your kids, that begs the question in other areas too. What are they
then
gonna say
a hard conversation is probably following that then.
Yes.
Okay, so just want to put language to this for you. So to say, like, I feel like sometimes we struggle with, like, how do I say these things to people?
Yeah, say the words.
Right, just this is literally what you can say. Like, hey, friend, my son Owen's not allowed to play this game. Could you just keep an eye out when the kids are at your house? Or we only watch these shows or these movies. So would you mind if the kids just play outside when they're together, or if they do something else when they're playing? I think it's okay to just literally say those words.
Yeah. No, I think it's really good.
Like this, and we've had this conversation with family members and different friends. And when we first got married, I grew up in a house that the TV was just kind of on in the background a lot. Like the news was on in the morning, and then the news or Oprah was on after school, and it was no big deal. And we could all just function with the TV on in the background. It didn't matter. And then Nathan grew up without any TV. And so when the TV's on, that's all he can do is watch the TV. So when we would go over to my parents' house for dinner or to hang out, it was really hard for him to focus and to have any sort of conversation with anybody. So eventually we had to say, like, hey, actually, I think my parents figured it out. Yeah. I don't even think we had to say anything. But if somebody's not figuring it out, like, it's okay to say, like, we really like you guys and we want to be able to hang out and have these times with you. Could you turn the TV off unless we're, like, here for that activity? Like, if we're here for the Seahawks game, great. Like, let's turn it on and we're going to watch the game. But if we're here for family dinner, then can we
go Hawks?
Just have no TV so that everybody can participate in the evening?
Yeah, and I think I would like a caveat. I don't think my brain is broken because we didn't have TV. I think my brain was broken, and so my parents got rid of TV. I think there was carting the horse there, but that's a caveat. Yeah, I think that's awesome to have that conversation. So then if tech expectations are radically different, right, we can just kind of establish those big boundaries.
Yeah, and it's okay to draw, like we said earlier, like sometimes that might mean hard conversations with your kids and with maybe a friend or a neighbor of, like, this isn't working and we need some space right now to kind of figure out where we're going to go next. And I feel like I do want to say, too, when kids come to your house, like, you get to be in charge of your own house. So when your kid has friends over, especially when your teens are coming over and they're coming over with their phones, like, if you have a no phone at the dinner table policy and these kids have come over and they're eating at your house, like, great. Put on your best, like, music and your best fun face and collect those phones and
put on your big girl mom jeans.
Yeah, you can do it. Like, you don't have to just be like, I don't know what to do. These kids all have their phones out and that's not really our policy. Like, first of all, hopefully your kid knows, like, that's not the policy. And second, like, that's okay. And, like, they might fight you for a second, but if you bust out their favorite pizza and then king size Twix bars and all the soda pop that they want, we're just going to swap their tech for sugar addiction. But, like, no, make it fun. And you can be like, hey, for an hour, we're all just going to play this game. And, like, you can be the fun coordinator.
When people are coming over, especially, like, a lot of kids are operating out of just, this is what we do. Like, we just have phones out.
We hang out and we sit on our phones together.
We sit on our phones and they think they are being social. They do not recognize, right? You're trying to explain water to a fish. So give them the freedom and the joy of recognizing what their worth is and what they can bring to this conversation when they're not hiding behind that screen. So do feel free to hold that standard and do it in love and do it out of hope. You're not scared they're going to somehow get gobbled up into tech zombies. You are hopeful of the person they can be, and you're going to remove any detriment or distraction from that.
Yeah. But I think your tech rules are allowed to apply to anybody who enters your home. Like,
do it.
Okay.
Yeah, and then school. You'd mentioned this previously. So
I know. I don't even know if we want to talk about school because...
Do it just a little bit. Just 90 seconds.
You're allowed to say to teachers and administrators if something makes you uncomfortable. I think a lot of parents feel like I just have to do whatever they're doing.
Right.
Which isn't true, especially if you're in a public school system.
Yes.
If something's not working for your kid or you're really struggling, like, you might need to edit this out. I'll say this example. And then you might need to edit it.
Probably going to keep this exactly as
in our school district, when they rolled out laptops to kids, they all had Minecraft on them.
Yes.
So what do you think kids were doing in class? listening and taking active notes and learning
Obviously.
so much from the teacher. No, everybody's playing Minecraft. So if you're the parent going, my kid's not doing anything except rotting his brain out playing Minecraft, like get on the phone and start making phone calls until they shut that down, because that's what had to happen.
Which, yeah, it lasted
That's
4
eventually
months.
what happened, right? But don't just sit there and go, well, I don't know, the school made this best decision. Some schools are just don't have bandwidth to make decisions about tech. And big tech knows that schools are a moneymaker for them. There is so much money to be made in education tech, and that's why it's entering the schools the way that it is. So if something's not feeling like this is right, or my kid's not thriving in this, I'm not talking about Zoom online school right now, because I don't think any kid's probably thriving in 8 hours of Zoom calls, but in a normal school situation, just feel like you as a parent, you do have a right to just ask questions and say, like, is there another way? Like, for example, I know also our district has moved a lot of textbooks online.
Right.
As an English teacher and as a student, as a parent, that just makes my skin crawl.
It's
like
an educated
I
consumer.
will be fighting for a printed copy of a textbook for our kids. Like whatever I can do to get that printed out, because kids learn better when you have a pen and a pencil.
And no notifications pinging you.
Yes, and you're not like, this is all I'm doing is looking at this piece of paper, as opposed to I got to deal with the screen and everything happening. So just know you have that right as a parent.
Yeah, and I think a lot of districts do need the encouragement, as the companies do. I mean, screen time if you have an iPhone, screen time was invented because of family pushback. And actually a bunch of families got together with a bunch of investment companies and bought a large number of shares of Apple and showed up and said, we need to change this. It was actually really cool. So this is the idea that a lot of districts don't have. Like if your child struggles with attention, and all of the different blinking lights on a laptop don't help them, or on a Surface or on a Chromebook or whatever the thing is, there needs to be a process for an analog option to some of this learning, and that is not built in for most districts. They spent millions of dollars getting these devices, hiring the teams, rolling out the IT framework, so they don't actually have usually a plan involved for, well, what about these kids with IEPs or 504 plans who have these non-digital learning focus issues? Well, that's where you come in as a loving parent. Again, you're not going to be mad necessarily. You just
and we're
need to
not
be
talking
intentional.
about right now if your kid's on online school.
Yeah, don't.
This is
online
not,
school is a
teachers are
nightmare.
not
No
making,
one wants this.
Nobody wants this. Teachers do not want to be teaching online. Admin doesn't want to be doing this. This is not what they are.
Right.
Like all my friends who are still teaching, they do not like this just as much as your kid doesn't like this.
Right.
That they want to be in a classroom with kids. That is what teachers, that's why people teach. It's because you like kids.
Yeah.
So if this is your issue, maybe just have some grace and like store that little nugget for
Yeah,
later.
thank you for sharing that though, because I did provoke you into sharing it, and I
know.
it was so
I don't want
good.
anybody to be harping on schools in this like weirdo
Yeah.
land that we're living in right now.
But keep in mind that as we move forward, we went to Owen's teacher and just said, "Hey, Owen's got a buddy. Show him his phone." Like,
even
in
before that, one of
kindergarten.
the options for circle time in kindergarten was to play games on a laptop. And I said, hey, is that mandatory? And she goes, no. And I said, great. I don't want Owen doing that. Please make sure that doesn't happen.
Right.
And she
Give him a
said,
puzzle.
yeah, she was like, great. I'll make sure I'll redirect and he won't be on the computer for circle time.
Right. So that's kind of what we were taking out. But just some people listening are going back to school. There are schools around the nation that are going back full time. So, all right. So when we talk about arguments against having these conversations, or just why people don't have them, I think there's really 3 reasons people aren't doing it. First is we feel overwhelmed. The second is we don't want to have conflict. And the third is, well, it's already out there. Like it's a tech world. We're never going back. So let's just kind of throw them off the deep end, and they got to learn to swim. They might as well learn it earlier than later. Yeah, about these 3. So I think to deal with them quickly, first, I'll tackle the first one. So the first is you feel overwhelmed. Thank you for listening to this podcast. You are doing the steps it takes to begin that conversation. I would just point you towards that online workshop that we've created. Again, in the notes, you'll find a link to it, and that is to walk either you or be a part of your church conversation or some local community that you want to tie in with that conversation, to walk through how do we love God and use tech and make a family framework so that we can have common expectations that apply to the whole fam. It's easy to feel overwhelmed. You got to start with little baby steps. It's the way you eat. Baby steps into the elevator. Baby steps. Yeah. So what about Bob reference, Anna?
Okay, number 2. The second reason is because we don't want the conflict. We're going to say you need to engage the conflict. Conflict is not bad in and of itself. And if somebody is violating your tech boundaries or your family's boundaries, and you feel anger for a reason because you're feeling like that your sense of safety or your kid's safety is being infringed upon. So just because you feel that, it's not a bad thing. That means you need to speak up and advocate for your family. If this person or this other family that's kind of rubbing against your family's tech policy is really on your side and really like a part of your life and wants your family to thrive, then we should be able to like move through this conversation and be problem solving. How can we make this work together? And I think that's kind of a key here, is coming at it from like, hey, this is what we're thinking. Like, how can we make this work for everybody, what everyone's comfortable with in this situation?
Yeah, and not expecting people to read your mind.
Right. Yes, I think you have to say this. We have friends who've done this really well. One of Nathan's sisters lives right next to their best friends, and best friends we're a family who kind of just had the TV on all the time. Like, we're just always going to have the game on. We're always going to have the news on. And Nathan's sister is a lot like Nathan, cannot think when the TV is on. And as they were starting to have kids, started to have that conversation with the friends of like, hey, if our kids are going to be running in and out of each other's homes like we'd like them to, you guys are going to have to turn off the TV, because I'm not going to send my kids over and just have the news on.
Right.
That's not going to be okay. And their friends were like, oh, like, we just hadn't thought about that. Like, sure, like, of course your kids are more important to us than having the random news on at dinner time. Like, great, but we just need to say, you have to say the words.
Say the words. Thank you, Daniel Tiger. I think so. Then the third one is, well, they're going to run into it anyway, and I would love to just tackle this as quickly as I could. This is a logical fallacy that we're running into. Well,
what was the argument?
They're going to run into this technology anyway. We might as well. Why wait? Why are we delaying the inevitable? Just toss them in now so they can figure it out. I think there's two lies being addressed here. The first one is, if our kids get to address tech early, then they'll be better at it. That is not correct. You have no evidence for this in research or even an anecdote that kids introduced to tech early have some kind of an advantage, unless you're teaching your kid how to code at the age of 6 or 7.
Sure.
And we're talking tool tech then. Listen to the other episodes and you'll see why that matters. But when we're talking drool tech, your kid will not somehow stumble through life not knowing.
He's going to be better at Netflix than your kid.
Yeah, like, oh no, your kid knows how to use an iPad. My 18-month-old knows how to use an iPad. Okay, it's not a difficult thing. So don't worry about your kid falling behind because they didn't have access to a whatever the leapfrog or whatever that tech is that you're feeling about. The second piece of that is that early introduction is not better because these programs, specifically drool tech that is used to consume, is designed to engage the users as long as possible. And there's behavioral design in that. There's a lot of stimulation designed into that, but it is programmed intentionally to capture an audience and to keep them. And that is never helpful over a longer period of time than less, and it's never helpful with a younger developing brain. Younger developing brains, especially in boys, have less developed prefrontal cortex or orbital frontal cortex, whereas a lot of the decision making and inhibition making is happening, where they're gonna decide if I should or shouldn't do this decision. That's basically not existent. So if it's shiny, flashy, and engaging, they're going for it every time, and that's not helping them make healthful habits. So I would say, when I say logical fallacy, I'm going to go probably the appeal to ignorance, that basically we're saying, well, we know it's going to happen at some point, but we don't know when, so you might as well make it now. But the exact opposite could also be argued. You know it's going to happen at some point, but you don't know when, so avoid it as long as possible. And that shows you that we're not using proper logic. Like that, you can just flip the argument on its head and it still sounds really good. So don't fall into that trap. If you choose to let your kid use this tech, pick what tech it is, have it be a conversation, and go for it. And if you don't choose it, don't just let that go. Stand up for what your family has chosen to do until your family makes a decision otherwise. But don't just let things slide, because it can get slippery. There's a lot of guilt and shame involved. There can be a lot of hurt feelings. And we just want to make sure we're being upfront, fighting for our kids, not with them.
Yes.
Cool.
Okay.
All right.
You can do it.
Woo,
you can
do
have
this.
a boundary, and you can tell somebody else about your boundary. And you can still...
But not on the social medias in a blast.
No,
saying,
in
"Look how much
real
better we are."
life.
Yeah, like with the faces.
Yes, in front of a face. Nicely.
In love, kind, right? And this is, I think, that great quote about like that Jesus Christ is grace and truth, right? So we definitely want to share truth, and we want to be honest and direct, but we also want to have grace in there. We don't want to have just one or just the other, because yeah, that wouldn't be including the fullness of Christ in this. So thank you guys for being a part of this conversation. I hope that it was, we hope, Hannah's got a huge smile, hope that it was encouraging for you and that it is something that will help you walk out this conversation with technology with your family. Check out the Family Tech Framework. Let us know what you think about that. If you have any questions, you can reach out to either of us, Nathan@flintandiron.org or Anna@flintandiron.org. You can check us out on Facebook @Sparking Purpose or on Instagram @FlintandIron. Thank you all for being a part of the conversation, and we look forward to continuing it as we work together to better love God and use tech. One of my favorite parts of working with Anna is real moments. Here's a good example from this episode. With that idea kind of planted, let's get this conversation started.
Did you want to do some general information?
I do. So I'm sorry. That's my lead in now is let's get this conversation started. And so right now there's like...
You didn't tell me that.
So that's kind of what's happening. And then it was so hard to find a spot to split it and then do it. So let's continue now, like we're coming back in, and I'll do the general info part.
Okay. Okay, great. We're going to talk about reestablishing tech boundaries with other people.
Super excited. My husband knows what's happening.
Well, it's great. I just didn't know that was happening.
I'm sorry. I didn't even think about it. I had changed it a couple weeks ago because, you mean you don't listen to the podcast? What? I think it works better.
No, I think that's a good idea. Yes,
Yeah, sorry. I didn't warn you that I'm going to say, let's get started. And we'll see you on the other side of this podcast.
Okay.
All right, everybody, welcome back. We are excited to start.
Welcome back?
Wow.
Not welcome back. It's been 1 second.
It's been a 30-second intro. All right, how about this?